So, welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about the self-funded learning organization. And today I have with me Lisa Lang. And Lisa is my colleague. We work together and she has a lot of experience running and implementing a self-funded learning organization or a self-funded model. So, Lisa, before we get any further into it, let's try and define what a self-funded model is in the first place.
So a self-funded model essentially means that you are pay-per-use, direct charge, and you're not receiving an allocation from the business as a typical HR function would, but instead your costs for personnel are being covered through the price of tuition, and in addition any kind of variable costs you may have also would be covered through your tuition fees.
All right, so where the normal learning organization's budget comes from HR or
Yes.
maybe sales enablement or any other organization, that is simply cut off. There's no funding from the business directly of the budget. Instead, the revenue that you need to pay salaries, that you need to maybe pay vendors, comes entirely from any revenue you as an organization can generate.
That is correct. And so the goal in our particular situation is that we operate out of a cost center. We still report into HR financially. However, at the end of the year, we come to zero.
Right.
So we want to try to make sure that we are not over or under on our budget, but we come in right at zero at the end of the fiscal year.
So you don't really have that profit target
No,
as
we
such.
don't. We do not make profit in our particular case.
Right.
But we're simply finding a way to fund ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's through, instead of the allocation, getting direct charges. So all of the tuition fees would cover every single expense that we have, including our own personnel.
Okay. So why would you move into a model like that? What are the benefits of implementing a self-funded learning organization?
Some of the benefits would be if you think that there could be a lot of fluctuation in demand.
Right.
It gives you the opportunity to scale up or down, and particularly if you do a lot of outsourcing, it gives you a lot of flexibility. It gives you some independence. So if you think that there may be some turbulent times and perhaps the business is not able to provide the allocation that they had in the past or that they typically would for HR, you have the opportunity to more or less cover your own costs, and so they don't have to make that investment up front.
Okay. Well, what about the downsides or maybe risks? I can imagine, what if you don't make enough revenue to cover your costs? That's a real problem.
It is a risk, and that makes it very important to work closely with somebody from the finance community. And in our case, we actually have someone on our team who is a BA, and we're constantly studying where we are in terms of covering those costs. So you have to be very good at forecasting at the beginning of the year, and then constantly updating your forecast so that you're certain you're going to come in where you need to when you finish the year, and at a minimum cover your costs.
Are there any other risks or downsides that you'd like to point out with the model?
Another downside could be that you have to be careful that people on your team are not trying to sell something that perhaps people don't need.
Right.
Right. I mean, or that there's some perception from the business that we're trying to sell something that they would not need.
Right.
Also, you have to be careful because oftentimes the business, they don't understand when it's an allocation how much they're actually investing and learning. It's just part of their budget. When they're paying a tuition fee, they may see that their prices have gone up, that it's more expensive. So it's important that you do benchmarking with the external prices so that you're not higher than what they would get on the external market.
Okay. So if you have this business case that you think, it might make a little bit of sense for us, it's something we want to explore, where would you start moving into a self-funded model, or perhaps even figuring out if this is right for my organization?
Well, first you need to make a business case and understand if it's actually viable. I think it's easier. In our case, we were in a hybrid model. So we had an allocation for our personnel expenses, but we were charging tuition for some of the variable costs, and it made it easier to then make that transition.
Right.
We did have to make some pricing adjustments. Careful not to raise them too high because, again, there's this perception that you're charging too much for training. You got to make sure that you're aligned with the external market.
Right, so we already had a scenario where training wasn't free for the
Correct.
employees. They had
Correct.
to pay
Yes.
a tuition fee. And now when you go into a self-funded model, perhaps those tuition fees will go up because you need to cover more expenses that previously the HR budget would have taken care of.
Correct. And the other thing we did is we tried to find some cost levers. So we tried to find some expenses that we were paying that we could reduce, some processes that could be more efficient.
Yeah.
In our case, we were using a lot of hotels for these programs.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to schedule most of them on site.
Yeah.
So we found ways to reduce our costs. At the same time, we were slightly increasing the prices and then making sure that we had a solid forecast.
Sounds like there was actually a little bit of benefit there to the business in general because it forces you to become much more cost conscious and efficient.
It does, and it also forces you to become very aligned with the business so that you know exactly what they're going to be needing within the next fiscal year. And with that, we implemented a CRM approach so that we had an alignment between a learning partner and someone either within HR, an HR business partner, or an executive within the business so that we were certain that we knew exactly what were the strategic initiatives coming out that year
Right.
and we could plan accordingly.
So you say one of the first steps is to create a business case. What would you say are some of the key elements that have to be part of that business case? I would think maybe identifying your revenue streams. Anything else you can think of that should be part of that initial business case?
You know, I think part of it too is making sure that you have enough volume to cover your costs that you have within your organization. I mean, if you don't, if you're fortunate enough to have a lot of resources within the organization, but you're not getting enough revenue stream to cover those costs of the personnel, it's just not going to work.
Right. So let's say you have a business case. You have support of your management. They think it's a wonderful idea. You're running training like a business. You're becoming more aligned and you're cutting costs overall.
Right.
What's your first step once you got your business case, you think this is going to work? How do you transition or how do you implement one of these things? What do you think are some of the key first steps that you have to take?
Well, one of the things that we did was actually lock ourselves in a room for a few days and just go through some spreadsheets and take a look at exactly how many times are we going to be delivering a certain course? Do we need anything new? You know, what does the business need? And what does that mean in terms of how many times we'll be delivering, what that was going to bring in terms of revenue, and how did that cover our costs at the end of the year? So that was important to kind of nail down, not only that, but different scenarios. It may be that, you know, given the business is moving in this direction, this may happen. It may be that, let's say, part of the business is carved out. If that's the case, then what happens? So you have kind of like an A, B, and C scenario to make sure that you're solid.
Right.
From there, you take a look at your pricing model and make sure that you're solid with that. And then you implement a forecasting model as well. So you have a process, and hopefully you have someone, like I said, who has a financial expertise to work closely with your learning organization to ensure that we're constantly updating that overall plan.
So you say, it sounds to me like you need some certain skills on your team to be able to do something like this. One thing you mentioned was perhaps someone with a financial background who knows how to run a business. I mean, traditionally, a learning partner may not know much about cost models or demand planning or customer relationship management. How important do you think it is to have these specialized roles who are more business focused to be able to do something like this?
I think it's critically important, and it may be that they don't come in with that skill set, but they have to have the capacity in order to ramp up to at least be able to manage their own budgets for some of their programs they're delivering, and then partner with the BA to ensure that they're forecasting and they're on track throughout the year.
Right.
So it's a skill set they need to develop, and additionally they need to make sure that they can partner with the business, that they're comfortable working with the executives and understanding what the needs are, so we ensure there's alignment.
So how about leading something like this, which is what you do on a daily basis, and managing an organization like that, how is it different from the other models that you've been through in your career?
Again, it's critically important to stay very tuned in to the numbers and make sure you understand exactly what's happening, not only within your own data, but also what's happening out in the business. Maybe there's some major change coming. You got to make sure that your team is aware and that you make those kinds of adjustments.
Right.
I think it's critically important to be, especially in the beginning, really tuned into the forecasting process and have a very solid process throughout the year to do that. Yeah, I think it's really helpful if you do have some background where you've been exposed to the business. I was lucky in my case to have some different experiences in my career where I was in learning, and in some cases I was working in other functions. So I was able to kind of bring that to the table.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite helpful. I think it's really important that you're able to be connected also with your headquarters organization and make sure that you're aligned with what's happening if you're not part of headquarters in terms of what direction that they're headed.
Yeah.
And I also think that it's important that you yourself are connected to the business leaders and that you're able to understand what direction they're headed as well.
Yeah. How about if you're not quite ready to take the full step into a self-funded model where you're, putting everything at risk? It's basically like running your own little business inside the business. What about hybrid models? You said that you were in a hybrid model before you moved into a fully self-funded model. What do you think of that? Is that a good first step, perhaps?
I think it's a great first step. And especially if you are not sure that you can initially cover some of your costs as you're ramping up as an organization. I think that's a great first step. And again, in that case, you get an allocation for your personnel costs, but you may have some variable costs, and in those cases, you're going to collect tuition. Honestly, I really love the self-funded model. We feel like we're entrepreneurs. We kind of run our own little business. The learning partners have each taken on different roles in addition to being a learning partner, a more traditional learning partner. In some case, we have someone doing marketing and communications and being more involved with technology or running kind of the vendor management piece of it. So I think it makes it more important for your team to be more diverse and also open to picking up other skill sets.
Right. Any other tips you want to give people before we finish off in relation to the self-funded model?
Yeah, I think I would suggest that you definitely do your homework. It takes a lot of preparation. Make sure that you have a very solid partnership with your financial community, with the VA. I think that's critically important. I think that it's important to keep an open mind, and it's kind of like it's scary in the beginning, but as long as you're really solid with your forecasting and you're tied into your metrics, you have a good chance of being successful.
Well, thanks very much for coming. I hope everyone enjoyed and learned a little bit more about the self-funded learning organizations that some organizations are moving to. Feel free to reach out, subscribe down below, and leave your comments and questions. Thank you.